Gandhi Matters, which the Raza Foundation is organizing in the Indian International Center with their collaboration. This is to run through the entire 150th year of the Mahatma. We are very, very lucky and happy to have somebody with us this evening, Professor James Douglas, who has, as you can see, many books, and he seemed to specialize on the unspeakable. We have a whole tradition in India of trying to articulate the unspeakable. But I'll not go into that at the moment. There will be perhaps an opportunity later. And we have Professor ASHIS NANDY, who, as they say, needs no introduction. Everybody who's in this room knows him, and the one who doesn't know him doesn't deserve to be in this room anyway. So if there is someone who doesn't, I would request him or her to leave immediately. This is going to be a conversation, but before we start, I'll request my friend Mohan Trivedi, who has a lot of jail-going experience. He has been in jail in many parts of the world. So we are lucky to have at least someone who has followed the Mahatma in that spirit. But anyway, he will introduce James Douglas. And he has told me that since he is a faculty member, he is in the habit of speaking for too long. So at some point, I'll have to stop him.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Namaskar. I'm really most delighted and extremely honored that Raza Foundation and IIC has made these organization and you all are here. I do want to quickly give you a little synopsis of our guest, James Douglas. And by the way, what he wanted to say, just to make sure that it is Mr. Douglas who has had experiences of going to jail, not only in United States, in multiple states, but also in Israel, in Jordan, and many other places. And he keeps on repeating this. So now, at least the people in Birmingham, Alabama, where he lives, they probably don't think that a peace march was successful unless he and his wife are arrested and then let go. But in any case, to give you a little quick synopsis of amazing things that they have done, I would say, first of all, that he was born on 16th of July in 1937 and in Canada. And the first 25 years of his life or so was really in pursuit of his academic interests, which were theology oriented and studying Christianity, mainly Christian theology, but non-violence's focus on that. And he started at UC Berkeley. He thought that he's going to be a nuclear physicist, and after a semester or so, he decided that he's meant for something else. So he goes to another college, university, close to that, University of Santa Clara, and started working in peace study, in theology. After that, he decided he wants to learn more, so he had some engagement at Notre Dame, and then he really thought that this is not enough, so he decided to go to Rome, to Vatican, and stayed there for 3.5 years. Now, while he started studying this thing very intently, he also came in contact during that time with Dorothy Day, which people who know the things, they say that it is probably within 5 or 10 years that she will be, she'll get the title of saint that Mother Teresa got also. And Dorothy Day stayed in his apartment for a couple of weeks when he was in Rome. But he was thinking about theology, but then he was coming in contact with really the peace activists also. And he decided to start his work at University of Hawaii pretty soon after his return from Italy. And there, in 1968, in some sense, the transformative thing happened, where it was the day after or a week after Martin Luther King's assassination, Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination, and he was teaching a class on theology of nonviolence. And he realized that some of the students in his class were late coming to the class. And so he said, then what happened? So they said that, oh, we are learning the ideas about how to do nonviolent protests. So when we found out that Reverend Martin Luther King was assassinated, and he was for the last year very vocal about ending the Vietnam War, so these young students of his, they went in the central area of University of Hawaii and they tore up their draft cards. So we were all required to be registered for going to the war, and immediate arrest was invited. They were taken up, and the students said that you have been talking about this, so why don't you actually walk your talk? And that was in some sense the end of his academic career. He says that he was baptized by that event, and the students showed him that he can do other things without getting chained in academic career, that I have been doing that for the last 40 years. But that story is different. After that, he was really interested in protesting against the Indochina War, and that was probably the first time he got arrested in Hawaii. That trial went on, became very famous, and after his arrest, the prosecutors who had prosecuted the Nuremberg trial, they heard about that case, so they flew in and they started supporting him as his lawyer. Initially, he supported himself. I mean, he represented himself. But that became quite famous, and then he started thinking even more, he and his wife, and then they found out that the nuclear weapons were getting very powerful, and he wanted to do something about that, she wanted to do something about it, and they realized that there was in Seattle, Washington area, a submarine base where the Trident missiles were put on the submarine. And the Trident missile were built at different places in the United States, and they would be carried there in what was known as white trains. So these were very highly secured, militarily guarded trains which would come from different parts. And these people had their own little underground intelligence gathering system. And so they would know, because the military is not going to tell them when the missiles are going to come. And they would pick it up, they will write a letter to the commander that we want to stop this train making progress towards the submarine, so we are going to stand on the road, on the tracks. And that became their habit for 15 years or so. And they were very famously known as ground zero protesters. So that particular thing that they started, which was right next to the track line, they purchased a little house, stayed there for many years, but idea was that this is going to be like Gandhiji's Satyagraha. They will tell them that we are going to do it, and we believe this is our cause. And their Masa's friend, ASHIS Nandy's friend, Richard Falk, who was a well-known faculty member as well as an internationally known peace activist and lawyer, he started representing their organization. And that ground zero protest became very famous, and in that also he was sent to prison many times. But some of the transformative experiences which were happening right there over the time, where that some of these people actually started changing sides. So those people who were working on the missile base, they started joining their things. Now that was the initial stage, and then because of the Dorothy Day's things, he was also inspired that you cannot serve the poor unless you live with poor. And so he and Shelley, for the last 25 years, they have moved to Birmingham, Alabama, and they live Birmingham and Alabama are some of the poor places in poor economies in the United States. But even in Birmingham, they live in probably the poorest part of the city, and there they have started a center which is called Mary's Home, where the rules are basically three. Anybody who walks on the door can access that. It is not locked. Anybody who needs food, they will share whatever they are eating. Anybody who says that they want to rest there and have something to kapra, they will have a closet full of things, and people can stay. Most of these days, it is really single women with little children who go, and no questions asked, they are there. One of the reasons Shelley is not here is because they cannot really leave that house, because they are the people who serve. He doesn't take anything out of that. He has not paid income tax in the United States for last 20 years or so as a protest, really, because he says that I cannot control what my government is going to use my tax for. And Shelley has been taking the great amount of $100 a month for last 25 years as a stipend for what she does. So $1,200 per month, per year. And that kind of living, like I was born in Wardha, and Gandhiji thought that Wardha was very large because they had 30,000 people. So he asked some of his friends that I want to go to Shegao because Shegao had only 300 people. They are the people who have lived the life of Mahatma, and so a lot of experiments with different types of truth he has been pursuing. Today the special thing is that he was able to come here because the book that he had published in 2012 was noticed quite well by people in a small community of people who followed Gandhi and all that. But he had told me the first time I met him in 2012 that would it not be nice if it is published in the language of the Mahatma in Gujarati. And his dear friend and mentor, Narayan Bhai Desai, he said, no, don't think about it because the government in power would never let it happen. And Narayan Kaka passed away after a year or so after that. But for him, and probably for me personally, that was a challenge. That will it be possible to do this thing in Gujarati? So thanks to our good fortune or providence, Sonal Ben Parikh, who herself happens to be the great-granddaughter of the Mahatma. We did not know that, but she is an accomplished writer, poet, and she took on the challenge of translating. And then Parul Ben Dandikar, who is from Dandi, she decided, she is a publisher of Yagna Prakashan, so they supported this. Parul Ben's father, Mohan Dandikar, is a Sahitya Academy winner writer and a translator of Pehle Girmitiya or something like that. So I'm really delighted that this thing happens, and I will now shut up. Thank you.
Mr. Douglas.
It is a miracle to be here. I never imagined I would be able to go on a pilgrimage into the truth of Gandhi as I have this past week, or that I would be sitting next to this giant and engaging in a dialogue with him. Thanks especially to my friend and a great poet and translator. So this is an experiment with truth. I have no other way to describe it. I didn't plan to write a book about Gandhi, although everything I have ever written has in a way been about Gandhi. But because of Dr. King, which Mohan described an experience that changed my life regarding Dr. King. Because of Dr. King's assassination, and because in 1999, 31 years after that experience of my students baptized me. My students baptized me, and Dr. King especially, who baptized them into nonviolence as a way of life and of liberation and of hope and of transformation. And for many years after that, I wanted to understand more deeply what that involved. I suspected, as my students were convinced, that Dr. King's resistance to the Vietnam War was profoundly involved in that. And in 1999, I attended a trial for 3 weeks, the only trial ever held for his assassination, and because of that, learned that, as the jury decided, the United States government agencies were involved in the assassination of Dr. King. And that was the unspeakable. It did not appear on the front pages of newspapers, except for one article in the New York Times which attacked the trial. In trying to understand it and writing about that unspeakable assassination, unspeakable because when the truth of it was revealed in a courtroom, it didn't reach the American people. I learned through a friend that there was something similar in the assassination of Gandhi. And I didn't know that. I was told to ask Arun Gandhi about it, and he was a friend, and he told me that he had spoken with the brother of Nathuram Godse, and that he had learned much about the assassination, and I asked him how I could learn more and more about it. He said, my son Tushar, and I read Tushar's book, Go Kill Gandhi, and then it was more and more and more and more. And what I learned in the end, so just to say that, and then we'll start our dialogue, because I'm here to learn from ASHIS Nandi about the depths behind Gandhi's assassination, which I'm only just beginning to learn about. What has shocked me is his second assassination. Yes, he was killed on the 30th of December, January. The 30th of January, 1948. But since then, it seems that, first of all, in the trial, and in the lead up to the trial even, there was something going on in the depths of India that I never understood from the United States. The basic way in which I have understood it since writing this book is that there is an analogy between the two greatest democracies in the world in terms of the number of people. I don't... The analogy is that, as in the United States, we have not dealt with the assassination of Dr. King. It's truth that he was assassinated by his own government, and the analogous assassinations of the two Kennedys and Martin and Malcolm X, so too in India is there a denial of what happened to Gandhi. I have learned that the man who was the mastermind and the inspiration of the assassination, because of the way in which the trial was conducted, that he went free, and just as he had done in 1909 in England, the man who pulled the trigger and who spoke the words in the courtroom that attacked Gandhi and that have been spoken many, many times since then, were actually from the mastermind who went free, Savarkar. I think I will ask you to share with me what you understand as the depths behind all of that, and then we can just speak together.
Well,
Put it on.
huh?
The mic. The mic.
Oh.
Yeah. In fact, I would say, put it differently, I would say that the struggle between the values Gandhi represented and the values which Savarkar represented had began before Gandhi came back to India from South Africa. It has a history of 100 years. Hindu nationalism, Hindutva as it is often called, was first discovered in Bengal in the first decade of the 20th century. And the struggle between that Hindutva and Hinduness, not Hindutva, but Hindu worldview, Hindu lifestyle, everyday Hinduism, it as a possible, not only as a possible counterpoint of Hindutva, but as a negation of Hindutva, was a part of public debate as early as in the first decade of the 20th century. Indeed, I would go to the extent of saying that Tagore's Gora, a novel that was published in 1910, anticipates both Gandhi and Savarkar. It is probably the paradigmatic novel of the struggle between modern India and India as it defines itself, what you might call the eternal India. Let me put it that grandly as that for the moment. I will spell it out. And my feeling is this, that novel is paradigmatic because in some sense it identifies the core problem which took its final shape, reached its climax, if you might call it so, in the assassination of Gandhi. Because if we know Savarkar's life, we also know that he was an atheist. Not only an atheist in the classical Indian sense, Buddhism is as a strand of atheism within it, so has Vedanta. So atheism is not unknown in Indian traditions, and it is within India's religious worldview, atheism has a place. Nastic means only those who defy the Vedas, not non-believers of all So, so in Indian tradition there was a place for atheism too, but this was not that atheism. It was 19th century atheism of Europe that Savarkar imported. Savarkar's three main arguments against Gandhi was, which could be the argument of against some of the major ills of traditional India. First, Savarkar believed that Gandhi was full of superstitions of all kinds, by which he meant that he talked about fasting and soul force as political variables, political vectors, and that was superstition indeed for him. Two, he considered Gandhi anti-scientific, because by science he meant modern Western science and the new emerging science of political science. And third is an analogous position. He disliked Gandhi, or he hated Gandhi rather, because Gandhi was totally illiterate in modern Western political theory. I mean, I don't want to go into the other part of the story, that Gandhi was perhaps the best read Indian on the dissenting traditions of the West. Three of his gurus, Gandhi declared gurus, all three were Western. Tolstoy, Emerson and Thoreau. Now, Savarkar's position was this, that these are irrelevant. What we have to have is this particular species of animal in India called the nation state, because that's the way the global political system was going. And India must have a proper nation state, because to equal the Western powers, it cannot but have a nation state. For nation state, you need not only a nation, but also a nationality and nationalism. So, this is for the first time somebody brings in nationalism as an ideology to India. Earlier ideology or earlier emphasis was on patriotism of a vague kind. Patriotism is something, a sentiment. Cats and dogs also have patriotism, in the sense they are territorial animals. Birds are territorial animals. Human beings are also territorial. It is naturally given to us, but that was not good enough. You must have a different kind of allegiance to your political unit called nationalism, which is what the Europeans are now developing. They also were quite happy with the concept of patriotism. But nation states came into being after the downfall of the monarchies. When the monarchies become constitutional monarchies, then the elites of the European societies were afraid what will hold the allegiance of people. Because previously, monarchy mediated between the heaven and the earth, but there was no apparent separate sanction for the new nation states. So it had to be propagated. Nation states had to be propagated. It should be increased with the help of propaganda. But the elites themselves, European elites themselves, the aristocracy particularly, never were nationalists, because they intermarried. They had to intermarry. All the European monarchies intermarried. So even the monarchs were not nationalists, because you do not know whom you will marry and who will become your relatives. So you learn. You had lived with patriotism, but not with nationalism. Anyway, I don't want to go into intricacies of that part of the story. All I want to say is this, that this was brought to India. Savarkar sought to bring it to India. And he himself, an atheist, non-believer in the Hinduism, when his wife died, he refused to give her a Hindu funeral, despite a sit-down strike by the workers of Hindu Mahasabha in front of his house. He willed that he did not want a Hindu burial, Hindu cremation. He must be carried to the cremation ground on a motorized vehicle. This is in his will. And he made fun of people like Golwalkar, who he thought were full of superstitions and were actually hidden followers of Gandhi, and so on and so forth. But that's a different story. I don't want to go into that. Now this search for a national identity for Indians and imposing this on the targeted community which will become the nationality in India, that namely the Hindus, which he by the way made it very clear that his Hindutva is nothing to do with Hinduism, also made him very contemptuous towards Hindus, because he knew that he did not enjoy the support of the people of India. And as years passed by, this became more and more obvious to him. And he hated Gandhi because he felt that Gandhi's superstition, his anti-scientific attitudes, and his version of political truth was something which was going to handicap India for all times to come. I give this as a background, and Tagore's Gora is a lovely account of this. Only thing is this, he locates both Gandhi and Savarkar into the same character in Goa, the hero of the Gora. And the novel ultimately shows that the hero of the novel discovers, that's the difference, he discovers that he is not even an Indian, not even a Hindu. He is the orphan child of an Irish couple. His parents having been killed in the mutiny. And he then changes his position and owns up values which he had previously rejected as totally incompatible with India's destiny. Now, strangely, I mean, mind you, this was being written at a time when Savarkar was unknown, and Gandhi also was so. And there are two lovely small books in Bengali, unfortunately, where the authors show this continuous projection of Gandhi-like figures in Tagore, in anticipation that, and with the conviction that somebody like Gandhi will emerge out of Indian society as a kind of a counterweight to the kind of nationalism which was also entering, which clear terrorist links. So, but that I want to leave it there then. The point I am trying to make is this, that this fear of deviating from the idea of a nation state, the fear that people will not be sufficiently allegiant to it, the fear that unless and until your state becomes a proper nation state, because states have been there for thousands of years. It is only in the 17th century that nation states came into being. So that's a different kind of state experience. It is not that all states were nation states. So it is in that context that we have to place this strange relationship between Savarkar and Gandhi, and the resolution of which was that Savarkar managed to get Gandhi killed. I will now ask Jim to give you a flavor of the way and Savarkar used the same technique all his life to mobilize his foot soldiers and escape the responsibility for the killings he was doing, starting with the first case he mentioned, the Madanlal Dhingra, who killed a former official of British government in India in London and was hanged for it. And Savarkar escaped scot-free, though he had arranged assassination. And in the case of Gandhi too, this happened. Let him come back to that part of the story.
Well, Gandhi actually had met Savarkar in 1906 previously, and had stayed at India House, where Savarkar was the mentor of younger students. So in 1909, it was his second meeting with Savarkar, and when Gandhiji arrived in, I think it was the 10th of July 1909, it was on July 1st that Madanlal Dhingra, Savarkar's student, who was had been a friend, his family friend of Lord Curzon Wyllie, who was the assistant to the Secretary of State for Britain over India. It was a massive kind of, or luxurious kind of reception for Wyllie in London by Indian students, and Madanlal Dhingra was walked up the steps as Wyllie came down the steps, and Dhingra bowed to him as a friend, just as somebody would bow again on January 30th, 1948, and he shot him 3 times, and then he shot to death someone who tried, a doctor who tried to assist him. And a month later, he was executed. Dhingra was executed. And a confession of Dhingra appeared in the London newspaper the following day, in which Dhingra said that he had to avenge the death of Indian liberation fighters who had done previous actions of liberation, had received suffering from the British, and that no one but he was responsible for that. And the man who had ordered him to that action, Savarkar, had written the statement. Madanlal Dhingra said to some of the other students before his execution, he said that it was necessary that he die and that they die because it would require many, many hundreds of Dhingras for one Savarkar. Savarkar himself, in the beginning of the second decade of the century, from 1910 on, he was taken to prison for being involved in a similar action in India by way of providing a pistol to the execution of another British official through another young man, in this case 16 years old, and Savarkar received a 50-year sentence. From 1911, it would have taken him until 1961 to get out of Port Blair and the Andaman Islands and the cellular prison, which was the most notorious prison in the British Empire. And Savarkar, and I think this is a point in which ASHIS NANDY has taught me to be open to the experience of Savarkar to the extent of understanding the depth of torture that he experienced in the cellular prison, because he then appealed for clemency repeatedly, and asked for forgiveness as a prodigal son. He used the term prodigal son of the British Empire during his time in the cellular jail. I think it is true that if somebody goes into the worst prison in the British Empire, there can be some understanding of that person in the kind of total reversal he had toward the empire, and then creating the philosophy of Hindutva. Nevertheless, by the early 20s, 1921, he was transferred from the Andaman Islands to Ratnagiri jail, and then to a further jail, which was the same one.
Yarwada. Pune.
Yes, Yaravada jail. And at the same time that Gandhi was in the prison for resistance through the huge campaign that was gaining more and more support within India, and Savarkar was at that time had become a prison librarian, and eventually the head of a factory in the prison. But when Savarkar was writing Hindutva, Gandhiji was only a few cells away from him, and when Savarkar was released finally under the kind of a house prison by the British, Gandhi came to visit him. It was the last time they would ever see each other, and he said to him, after talking with him for some time and trying to find some common ground with this man, the last statement he made to him was, "I hope you will tolerate my experiments with truth." And Savarkar said, "It would be at the expense of India." Savarkar and Gandhi had an encounter that for me defined their entire relationship in October 1909, after Dhingra had been executed. It was I think it was October the 2nd. That was the feast of Dusara? Dashera. And Savarkar well, it wasn't he who invited, it was his students who invited Gandhi into their lion's den. They invited him into a celebration of that feast, and then the Ramayana and the story of the killing of Ravana, which Savarkar took to be a very literal interpretation of the story, and Gandhi described it as an experience of suffering, the kind of suffering that would free India someday. And Savarkar said, no, there must be the actual killing. There must be the actual killing in order to have liberation. And he interpreted that story continuously through the rest of his life. I tried to trace it through his publications, even after the death of Gandhi, and when Savarkar was in his 60s and had been many years after he was discharged from any responsibility for killing Gandhi, he was still making references, mythological references to the ways in which he could justify, without specifically saying, the assassination of Gandhi. I was kind of overwhelmed by this because it bore such strong analogies to my own experience in the United States and the ways in which the people I was researching there had been killed from behind the scenes through similar ideas about good and evil. the person I found most analogous to Mr. Savarkar in the United States is Mr. Alan Dulles, who is the head of the Central Intelligence Agency. Alan Dulles used a term called plausible deniability. I thought in following Savarkar's story in relation to Gandhi and the ins and outs of it, and then the way in which Savarkar met Godse in the late 20s, when Godse's father moved to, as a postmaster, was moved into Ratnagiri. 3 days later, his son, Nathuram Godse, found Savarkar, and from that point on became his secretary and devoted himself to that man for the rest of his life. And the degree to which Savarkar then oversaw his publication, the Agrani, and his very close co-worker, Mr. Apte, it was the same sort of relationship which then amounted to a plausible deniability that went right through the assassination and the trial of the conspirators. The way in which the trial proceeded after the assassination, I found to be a perfect case of plausible deniability. What I found most striking was the way in which Savarkar managed to be the power in the courtroom, just as he managed to be the power behind Godse in the assassination, without ever seeming to be even related to Godse. If you see the pictures of the seven who were involved and who were in the courtroom together, Savarkar always managed to be separated from the others to such an extent that Godse himself said to his closest friends that if he could just get a look from Savarkar, if he could just get some kind of a touch from him, he would be, publicly, he would feel a certain strength. But Savarkar always kept himself distant from Godse at the same time as he was passing information to him, which Godse then said on behalf of Savarkar in the courtroom to attack Gandhi. And the proceedings allowed Godse 9 hours attacking Gandhi. I could not understand that. The assassin, given the opportunity to attack the victim of his assassination, what was going on in that courtroom? I read the transcript, and then I read things that weren't even in the transcript because I read descriptions of the trial and learned that at one point the Home Minister in Bombay, Morarji Desai, who would later become Prime Minister, who had the information regarding Gandhi's assassins coming, because, as you know, on January the 20th, the same people attempted to kill Gandhi as would return on January 30th. Astounding. There were 7 present on the 20th, and there were 3 who returned on the 30th. But one of the 7 on the 20th was apprehended. The police had him in their grasp, and he told them about the others. And his employer, this was Mr. Pawa, his employer, you interviewed Mr. Pawa.
Yes, I did.
What did he say?
Well, the same old story. Yes.
Same old story.
He started by saying there is a difference, of course. this is India, and complexity of everything is unbelievable.
Yes.
Pawa, for the first few months I had known him, spoke continuous the language which you find in Nathuram Gore's confession.
Yeah.
Only ornamented with strong swear words
Yeah.
and abuses against Gandhi. Absolutely, but the Punjabi hard boy, you know, and he made no bones about it. And as time passed, we were in touch for about something like little more than 2 years. So, as time passed, gradually his tone began to change. And towards the end, perhaps sensing that his end was near because he was on dialysis, he began to say, at that time I was different. Now I am a humanist. And then he began to sing praises of his birthplace, Pakpatan, where there was a dargah of Baba Farid. And he would describe how every year there would be a festival and Qawwals will come and sing. He even sang out some of the Qawwalis he had heard, you know. Whole tone was different. He started saying that if you want to learn good manners, you have to go to Muslims.
Yeah.
It was the Muslim communities where, you know, it's different. It's not that. It was not the fault of the Muslims, but it was the fault of some Hindus who collaborated with them and nurtured the Muslim League. He said, for example, that Jinnah was an honest congressman, but he was thrown out of Congress by Gandhi, and so on and so on. And ultimately the values he spoke about were quasi-Gandhian. So that was the ending. Shomishta is here. She has, you know, her friend Rajni Bakshi did some of the interviews. She found it very difficult to tolerate his Pawa, because he had tested his bomb in a cinema hall in Hyderabad, the bomb which he tried to kill Gandhi. So it shows the kind of a element of psychopathy in the personality, that she asked him, why did you throw it in a cinema hall? They were Hindus or Muslims. How did you know that there will be only Muslims?
Yeah.
He said, doesn't matter. Anybody who goes to cinema actually is sinful. It doesn't matter whether he is Hindu or Muslim. So just as an experiment, he threw the bomb in the cinema hall and killed some people randomly. So, and that's the same bomb he tried, but there it didn't work very well on 20th January, and he was caught.
For the government to have on January the 20th, I found then that his employer, Professor Jain, had also, he had gone to the government in Bombay, as well as, so they had information from 2 distinct points, from Mr. Jain giving it to the Bombay Home Minister and Hit Minister, and then from both Mr. Moraji Desai and Mr. Kerr had it in Bombay, and then the police authorities had the same information in Delhi. And it was the descriptions that were given in the trial of the movement between the different police authorities, and also in Pune, because there was an identification of Apte and Godse for their publication in Pune. The degree to which the authorities were almost totally passive in regard to pursuing these leads between the 20th of January and the 30th was so remarkable that even the judge in the trial denounced the police authorities at the end of the trial. Nevertheless, Savarkar, through that, was allowed to meet with Apte and Godse repeatedly during that period, and actually with most of the other conspirators as well, in his home. And in addition to their having the information from both Pawa and his employer, Professor Jain, the authorities also had, during the course of the trial, the direct testimony of Savarkar's secretary and his bodyguard. And they had these men in prison for 2 years, Savarkar's secretary and his bodyguard, and they had the confirming testimony that would have convicted Savarkar had it been brought from these two prisoners into the trial. It was never done.
There is once you get some hints why they didn't do it, because there are reports of both Moraji Desai
Yes.
and some of the cabinet ministers in Nehru's cabinet believing that they have already antagonized the Muslim community, who have already opted for Pakistan.
Yeah.
Now they didn't want to antagonize the Hindu community
Yes.
by accusing Savarkar and convicting.
Yes.
So there is that part of the story also.
Yes.
I think the main lesson of this should be a little different. I think ultimately, exactly as the way Tagore has anticipated the two strands in our polity which were acting upon the minds of India and determining the future of Indian polity.
Mm-hmm.
Something similar can be seen in a play which Prasanna, the Kannada writer, wrote and staged in Delhi, where each of the characters in the play plays the role of both Gandhi and Nathuram Godse.
Mm-hmm.
The main argument, therefore, the Tagore's argument comes back. It comes back in a sense that each person has the potentiality within him
Yeah.
to pursue the worldview of Gandhi
Yeah.
or the worldview of Savarkar, and he or she has to make a choice.
Yeah.
So that's the lesson of it.
Yeah.
So Savarkar was tapping one part of human nature.
Yeah.
Gandhi was tapping another part. And there cannot be any reconciliation between that two. But it is possible for human beings to make the other choice too.
I'm thinking of Dr. King now, again, in relation to that choice. And he said repeatedly that it is no longer a choice between violence and nonviolence, but instead between nonviolence and non-existence. Non-existence. Now, when he said non-existence, he had a very specific reference to nuclear weapons and his own national security state, which he resisted profoundly in the last year of his life, 1 year to the day from his assassination, or before his assassination. At the Riverside Church in New York City, Dr. Martin Luther King gave his great speech called Beyond Vietnam, the greatest speech of his life, in which he said very specifically, the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today is my own government. And in 2 weeks after that, a man named James Earl Ray in a Missouri state prison, he escaped. And shortly after that, he was contacted by a man, very mysterious man named Raoul, in a bar in Montreal. And from there on in, Raoul and James Earl Ray were together. Now, the unspeakable that a monk named Thomas Merton, great writer, American writer and poet and essayist, he wrote about this term, the unspeakable, and that's how I began to understand it. He said there was a dimension of systemic evil. When he's talking about the unspeakable, he's talking about wherever we don't want to go. A kind of evil like Auschwitz, Buchenwald, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, assassination of Martin Luther King, Gandhi. We don't want to go there in terms of its being a depth of relationships and acceptance of responsibility that is unspeakable. In the case of the trial of the conspirators in Gandhi's assassination, I found illuminating the Kapoor Commission that you had here, in contrast to the Warren Commission that we had in the United States on Kennedy's assassination. The Kapoor Commission was brilliantly helpful. And I discovered through that in a reconsideration of the case, the conclusion was that it was clearly Savarkar and his group who was responsible for the assassination of Gandhi. And I have been encountering in all kinds of places a belief that the exact kinds of statements that Athuram Godse made in his 9 hours on the stand have become like common belief in this country. I read his brother's description of all this, and I know from talking with Arun Gandhi who met with him and who said openly that all of this came from Savarkar, I know that this is out. It's out just as the way Martin Luther King's assassination is out from the trial that I attended in the United States. What is going on? The thing that Shelley, my wife, and I have learned from Gandhi through direct experience in campaigns and in what we do through experiments with truth. We're followers of Jesus, number one, and to understand Jesus, we try experiments with truth, following Gandhi, seeing him as the disciple who understands what Jesus is all about. He's and we're not unique in the world. There are millions of people who do this with regard to Gandhi. But if you have stories about Gandhi circulating that are coming from the mouth of the assassin and of the assassin's mastermind, assassination's mastermind, Gandhi's way, which is a profoundly liberating way, is being blocked constantly by lies, just as in the United States of America, the truth of Dr. King, that he was assassinated by government agencies because of his resistance to the Vietnam War, and by creating a campaign to stop and abolish poverty, not only in the United States but in places around the world. It's all in a final statement of his in a last book he ever wrote. What is going on in these two countries? We have a holiday for Dr. King proclaimed by the government that assassinated him. And I understand you have a very big statue here. It's been created recently. And I saw further statues being created for Gandhiji's 150th anniversary. It seems to me that if there is to be a memorial to Gandhi in the next year, it would perhaps be through a recreation of the process of his final experiment with truth. Do or die. In other words, we do as he was doing to the fullest extent in our lives, non-violently, through the power of truth, an experiment that will help liberate us and our world. I don't know.
Should we wind up?
We need to have dialogue.
Yes, I will open it for questioning, but I want to make one comment, just 1 minute. I want to suggest that unlike probably in the case of JFK and Martin Luther King, in case of Gandhi, from the beginning there were very strong opposition to him from the first generation of India's freedom fighters. In fact, there was a liberal, I think some Srinivas Murthy, he said, I remember, and T.K. Madhavan quotes it at the beginning of Dvija, his book, that this man has stood against everything that the great sons of India have preached us over the last 150 years. No, he has negated that. He thought Gandhi to be a lunatic. Gokhale felt that Gandhi himself will burn his copy of Hind Swaraj once he is more experienced in Indian reality. It is not an accident. And Jawaharlal Nehru beautifully put it. Bapu, you are far greater than those little books of yours. By which he meant, of course, Hind Swaraj, an autobiography. I think the appreciation of Gandhi as a thinker, as an intellectual, as a usable model of change was never there in a serious way entered the mainstream of politics in India. Never. It was an uphill struggle. The entire cabinet, that explains why Savarkar escaped, was quite convinced that Gandhi was a great man, and by which they mean that he should be applauded, he should be revered as a saint. You put him on a shelf and garland him every day and call him Gandhiji or Mahatma Gandhi, and you have done your duty. But you cannot use him in everyday politics. It's a negation of our concept of common sense, our concept of rationality, our concept of knowledge. Savarkar was right. And that is why we have arrived today at a state when the Indian state is a predominantly Savarkarite state today. I hope it is transient, but it may not be as transient as we think it is. It looks at present. It may not be as transient as that. I think this is because Gandhi defied common sense. And common sense is something, the common sense is a part of culture. There is a culture of common sense. And once the culture of common sense permeates the entire polity, then you get exactly what you say. It happened in the case of his assassination. People think the assassination is bad. In fact, there were riots after it in number of villages in Maharashtra. People were killed. The house of the Brahmins were burnt. It was a full-fledged riot in Maharashtra. But that is different because it came from a section of the population which was not seen as part of the ruling elite. The common sense that is anti-Gandhian had already percolated the Indian polity in a big way by the time he was assassinated. So, in some sense, Gandhi's assassination was also a protest and a rejection of that common sense. And he, through his death, through his assassination, he invited the assassination, as you know, and as your book recognizes in some senses. He invited the assassination because he felt that perhaps that will empower the forces he represented and give them another lease of life in Indian polity. It evidently hasn't done so to the extent that he wished. And that's another story.
I would just add one comment to your beautiful description of what was really going on. In one sense, yes, he was preparing for that and hoping for that kind of an encounter with, for that matter, his enemy all his life, and he wished to die in that way. But at the same time, and this is not either or. At the same time, Gandhi expressed in the week leading up to his assassination that what he planned to do, if he lived, was to walk to Pakistan. At the same time as he's preparing himself for death and recognizing that they probably will come back again, he's hoping and preparing for what perhaps could be done in the 150th year in a way that would be truly celebrating the life of Gandhi. I think Gandhi had all kinds of visions that were not realized, but the specific vision that he had at that time, he especially hoped, just as he had done in numerous places, from Noakhali through Bihar, through Calcutta, through Delhi, stopping violence by his either walking through and uniting with the people in those areas. He wanted to do that in Pakistan. He even had Mr. Suhrawardi on his behalf talking with Jinnah about the possibility of it happening. Of course, it didn't happen. But these visions were still alive in Gandhi.
Yes, we have some time for brief comments and questions. Yes. Remain brief, please.
My name is Ruchira Gupta, and thank you so much for this really wonderful discussion, Ashish Da and Mr. James Douglas, that you conducted today. It just took me down memory lane, reading some of the books that I'd read about how Gandhiji was assassinated. But I think one of the most fundamental questions that you put to the audience today was that what's going on? And really, why is there fascism so mainstream in both India and the United States, in both our countries? And my response to that is that basically one country fought colonialism through civil disobedience led by Gandhiji, the politics of non-violence, and the other through civil war. And in one country, gun culture is very inherent. In ours, creative chaos. And in both countries, of course, what we also see is that one country followed a path of socialism, another of capitalism. So two different ways of evolution in our democracy, and yet we have fascism in our midst today, possibly because what both countries did not tackle was the inherent hierarchy in our cultures, one of caste and the other of race, but both really based on sexism, a very deep-rooted sexism, which is used to reproduce caste or race. And here we are today because countries which accept that there is going to be a man as the head of the family will continue to accept a strong leader and so on and so forth. And Gandhiji was trying to overcome that as well because he was doing role reversal. And he would do things which women did. He would clean toilets which were considered polluting tasks by people from oppressed castes. And people have not totally evaluated that part of Gandhi's message and his experiment with truth and never mainstreamed it. So I think this is one of the reasons what's going on, is not tackling hierarchy.
If I may add one sentence on it, Nathuram Godse got his name from the fact that he was brought up as a girl for a few years.
That's right, yes. And the nickname
Nathuram comes from Nath.
Nath, yes, he was a girl, he was brought up as a girl. And Savarkar, his nickname in college was Cocaine, because he was addicted to cocaine, and his brother actually used to beat him as a young child if he would refuse to mix cocaine for the elder brother. His parents had died in the plague, and an cruel elder brother brought up Savarkar.
Yes. Is there somebody else?
Yes, this side.
Yes, please. Take.
Thank you so much, Mr. Douglas. When you said that Morarji Desai had information and he didn't act on it, so was there some collusion between the government machinery and including Mr. Patel, Sardar Patel coming to speak to Gandhi and saying that should we arrange more protection for you? So if you could elaborate a little bit more about the collusion in the existing governing machinery and the assassination process. My query to Asista is that in this whole reading of the continued engagement between Savarkar and Gandhi, now reading it through only Tagore's Gora and this kind of psychoanalytic rendering is one side, but historically Savarkar was associated in killing of Gandhi. Therefore, the issue is not just about making a choice, but acknowledging the challenge of Savarkar killing Gandhi. And so how do you accept this challenge of if there is a Savarkar dimension in each one of us? So it is not just each human being has a Savarkar side or a Gandhi side, but how do we confront the reality of Savarkar's killing Gandhi?
There was an exchange in the trial with Morarji Desai, which I'll just cite in a moment. But the apparatus beneath Morarji Desai was you've got to read the details, and I can't possibly get them all in here. What I should say is that Morarji Desai stated that he had been given the information by Professor Jain. He acknowledged that he had the information from Professor Jain. He said he then passed it on to two primary authorities. The first was his police commissioner, and the second was Sardar Patel. He said he did that. What then happened to it, like a number of these stories, which all of these different police people tell, it goes into thin air. You can't follow the process because they're all saying, I said from him, he said, but he didn't hear from me. The conclusion that I reached was the bureaucracy which these two, well, I'm talking about now Mr. Nehru and Mr. Patel, the bureaucracy that they took responsibility for as they became the Prime Minister and the Home Minister of India was precisely the same as had put 100,000 Indians in prison. I mean, are we to be surprised that they're not going to be all that responsive to information that should save Gandhi, and with members of the same party that Savarkar had founded within the cabinet of Nehru? It's just all tied together, and it's what in my context was called a national security state and the military-industrial complex, that kind of information 3 days before President Kennedy came into power. And I'm just making analogies because it's as unspeakable in terms of the depths of its involvement in the state in both of our countries that we just don't know because they're all telling lies. They're all telling lies. And Morarji Desai in the trial, there's a particular point at which he's being questioned by Savarkar's attorney, and the attorney makes the mistake of asking a kind of question that attorneys should never ask because of something that, the witness might say. He asks him a question about what else he knew regarding Savarkar, and Morarji Desai realizes this is something that maybe he doesn't want to say in this particular context, and he looks at Savarkar and he says, "What should I say?" And the attorney immediately asked the judge to erase it from the record, and it was erased from the record. But of course, there was a reporter in the courtroom, and he put it all in the newspaper the next day. just not perhaps a big item, but it's there. And I put it in here. But this is the kind of thing that's going on. And it's not like these people want to have Gandhi killed. It's that it's the state. Finally, we have our state. We have our state.
Yes.
And it's going to be overcome by these people if we are not careful. And Gandhi is already dead, so what's the difference? The difference is what's going to happen 50 years later, because we don't tell the truth then.
Yes.
If we don't tell the truth then, we get what we deserve.
That's right. Very nicely put. Because that let me don't know surprise about it that Moraji was a very cocksure person. And he is one person who will always answer your question with a question. So that was not the exception. That was the rule. I think the concept of the state, nation state, has already proved very addictive. It is that kind of nationalism is promoted also addictive. It is not a surprise that I was telling this to somebody, and I have also written about this, that even 10 years ago, a Pew survey showed that Indians were the most nationalist country in the whole world. In the 44 country study, Indians were by far the most nationalist country in the world. The second was Bangladesh of all other countries, but then it was Bangladesh was quite new then, so you can imagine that nationalism. Pakistan and China, to whom we improved great degree of nationalism, they were miles behind. They were miles behind. Now, why is this the case? And why do we have to go to bed every day after hearing 3 sermons per day on how to become more nationalistic? And who is nationalist, who is not, who is little less nationalist, who is Indian, who is not, how much of an Indian is, who is Hindu, who is not, who is half Hindu, who is soft Hindu, and that kind of thing. I think there is some insecurity there also. But basically, it comes from the idea that we impute a sanctity to the nation state as a concept, not as an existential state, but as a concept. And that abstraction and reification takes it at the right time, takes its toll. It takes its toll. Anyway, that is why I think we had a nice discussion. Oh,
I have a question.
Okay, please.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I have a couple of questions.
Asked first one and wait.
Thanks, Mr. Douglas, for your speech. It was so beautiful. In fact, in the last, you are talking about Gandhi's dream to visit Pakistan. And in the year of his 150th anniversary, this is a hope. And I just salute yourself for this hope. In your talk, you are talking about King, Martin Luther King, and you say that his views on non-violent and violent state. I want you to take a little early. During the First World War, Helen Keller has delivered a lecture on 5th January 1916 in the Carnegie Hall of New York, and the lecture is called Strike Against the War. There she is dreaming. This was a lecture slightly before America entered in the First World War. And when you quote Dr. King, that dream seems to be lost. Today, all the state throughout the world is involved in selling weapons. All the states. So that dream of non-violent state, whether it is said on the name of Gandhi or on the King, it seems to be lost. Do you really believe this is lost? And if it is lost, when exactly it has lost? And how it can be revived? This is my first question. This is to you. I have another question, and that I want to ask
But more
to
briefly.
Professor Nandi.
Wait for the answer of the first.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, yes, it's been lost and lost and lost and lost and lost, and it's been drilled into our heads that it is impossible to be regained, and that is total nonsense. I was sat down only an hour ago with you, and I heard it regained in just in that one conversation. And there are people sitting around this room tonight in whom Gandhi is fully alive, but the state would like us to know that it's impossible to regain any of this vision, and they would like to tell us that 24 hours a day. And that's the way in which they want it to be lost. In other words, for us to feel it is impossible for us to do what we are doing, and that it's impossible for us to join together in ways that we are joining together, and will continue far more profoundly to join together. This is the propaganda. The number one thing in the propaganda is you are powerless. Everything is lost. But it's not. And you are the proof that it's not.
Yes.
Ashok.
My other question is to Professor Nandi. On a different occasion today itself, you were telling village and cities, they develop together at the same time. Today, towns and cities are developing and villages are dying. A few months back, the government of Jharkhand has given the property of a villager in the district Godda, and the name of that village is called Mali. That's tribal's village. They don't take their remuneration for their land, and they are protesting, and the state has sold it. I think the village is now dying. In fact, for a few years I'm working with All India Panchayat Parishad. This is an apex body of the village. Do you think there is a possibility that the Gandhi's village in Hind Swaraj is somewhere, or it can be survived, it can be revived in 21st century? If there is a hope on it, I would like to listen to your views on it. Thank you.
That's not that relevant to today's discussion, so I will have the discussion with you some other day. Let Ashok have his say. Concluding.
Well, I was going through some of the Gandhian papers, and at one place Gandhiji says, people believe I am a saint who is acting as a politician. In fact, I am a politician trying hard to become a saint. Anyway, I think we had a very interesting and a very illuminating. Madam, where were you?
I'm sorry, I can't resist asking this.
Very brief, please, because we have to finish.
I heard a narrative today, and I'm not very surprised. I'm Gauri, I'm in Gurgaon. I studied Gandhi when I was in college, and I'm a great admirer of this man. I really want him to be revived back into India. My only question here is that the core of this whole discussion seemed to be around Savarkar, Hindutva, and what is being made out to be the narrative for Gandhi today in the context of the strong nationalism of which Hindutva propagates. To me, as I have lived these last 50 years, I have seen Gandhi over all these years, as a kid, as a teenager, and now. while Gandhi has emerged as an anti today, because a lot of new narratives are emerging about him which we did not know as kids and teenagers, the fact remains that I've seen the erosion of Gandhi in front of my eyes over the last 70 years and not today. I think what Ashish Nandiji mentioned about Gandhi not being even accepted by possibly Nehru's cabinet itself probably negates the entire argument of how the nationalistic forces actually created the story of the anti-Gandhi. I want to truly and truly understand that who is Nehru's Gandhi and why didn't he survive these 70 years of Congress rule? Thank you.
I want to. I don't think it's a good point, but another day, another discussion.
Well, we come to the end of the evening. Our next session of Gandhi Matters will be on 10th January, and Dr. Trideep Suhrid will speak on reading autobiography in 2 tongues. Some of you know that he has recently translated the original Gujarati autobiography into English. It's quite an interesting document. In fact, it's a classic of translation. So he's coming on the 10th of January. And hopefully there'll be in the same place. So you better come a little early so that you get your place, apart from getting samosa and teas. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctor.
May I? Oh. Whoa. I'll try to get them to my wife's belly.
Yes.
She'd love to have these.
Ashish, yes.
You get these are for you.
Oh.
Have you moved?